So our first speaker for the second group of talks is Brendon Slade. Brendon is the director of the NXP General Purpose MCU ecosystem team. He has more than 25 years of experience in the DSP and microcontroller industry, where he's held design, applications, and technical marketing roles, serving industrial, mobile, automotive, voice communications, and audio processing markets. I don't even want to ask what Brendon does in this. I don't want to know what you do in your spare time. So Brendon's team focuses on enablement of NXP's microcontrollers for edge processing, and that involves working with partners and NXP's internal software teams to define and deliver complementary development tool and software solutions. Brendon, the topic of your talk is introducing NXP GUI guider and RT thread for graphics design on i.MX RT MCUs. Over to you. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Max. I just wanted to, I hope Robert will forgive me. I thought you did a great job presenting there. I just pinged something up about a company that does secure device programming for both his company and mine. So that's in the chat, that's Nubaton. And I also wanted to ping out a link to something we just released to do with this kind of untrusted manufacturing site that would apply to anybody using RT thread or any other RTOS or bare metal. So I just pinged that in the chat box, but I will stick to the subject at hand. I'm assuming I'm on the rough same kind of time allowance as before, and we're going to just shift along and go roll with the punches. So can you see my slides there, Max?
You can.
Okay, great. So today I'm going to talk to you about a particular application area to do with GUI guider. We call it GUI rather than GUI, is a bit quicker to say, and how you can use that with RT thread on graphics designs on our i.MX RT crossover MCUs. So let me advance the slide. There we go. So we're going to do a very quick overview of NXP's MCU graphic strategy, so you guys know where this fits in and the option and amongst the options we have. Then I'm going to talk a bit more about what GUI guider is and how it relates to the LVGL open source graphics library, and then how RT thread comes into play as an option when you're using these tools and that platform. So looking at that graphic strategy, so our approach is to provide a very broad enablement across our MCUs and MPUs, but this is focused on our MCUs. And LVGL is highlighted here. This is the open source graphics library initiated by or created by Gabor Kisbermosi, who's presenting tomorrow. I really encourage you to go along to that presentation if you're in any way interested in graphics. We highlight this as obviously a key part of our strategy because it's an open source based strategy. So the LVGL library is completely open source with a very vibrant community behind it. And we developed a UI design tool, WYSIWYG design tool called GUI guider, which complements it. And Gabor and his team have subsequently introduced a design tool for that called Squareline, which again, Gabor will be presenting tomorrow. This is part of a spectrum of solutions we provide because different customers have different needs and wants. So we work with several premium suppliers in the graphics space: Embedded Wizard from Tara, Crank Amatec, Qt, Altia, and we also have other free options from Microsoft Azure and with their GUIX library, and Sega with their MWin library. MWin is a binary license, and Microsoft one is free to use with source code, but is not what you call a true open source projects like LVGL is. So looking at the different platforms we have, I'll talk a bit more about platforms as we go, but basically the i.MX RT 4 digits are the ones that begin with 1 and 3 following digits. That's what we call RT 4 digit crossover processors. They're general purpose M7 based, Cortex M7 based processors running up to 1 gigahertz. And then we have another family called the RT 500, which is geared towards wearables primarily, but can be used in any low power application, and also has graphics acceleration. Then we have the OPC 5000 or 54,000 and 5500 series devices, which have various degrees of capabilities. the ones that have the acceleration are the RT 4-digit pass, RT 500, and the LPC 54000 series. But you can see GUI Guider is the one with the most comprehensive support, and it's not only for devices that have acceleration, but also lower resource devices as well. So if we look at the GUI Guider and what GUI Guider is, but first we're going to talk about LVGL again. So again, open source graphics library, very vibrant community. They're very open to contributions and suggestions, and there's a lot of evolution going on with that library. So it gives you a lot of easy to use graphical elements or widgets, and you can create great, beautiful visual effects. There's some images over on the right of some demos that they provide for free for any platform. And they also have enablement for some pretty advanced graphic animation, so you can really generate a very nice looking UI without having to go to one of those more premium solutions. And NXP has accelerators called PXP and VG Lite, and we've contributed library support for those along with other widgets that we contributed to the general community. So PXP and VG Lite provide different levels of acceleration in different things. VG Lite is vector graphics light. It's light as in compared to OpenVG. So it's a compromise between power and cost versus a full OpenG implementation, but provides a lot of important acceleration in a lot of applications. And you'll see those accelerators really come into play when you're looking at larger displays. And there's a summary here. I won't run through all the different items, but the accelerating functions that you get from using those particular hardware blocks. So GUI Guider is free to download at the link at the top of the page there. It's designed to be very user-friendly with a WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get approach. And you can easily just drag and drop widgets into the screen layout that you have. You can generate application code for all the standard tool chains that we normally support. And also we provide a series of templates for all our standard evaluation boards. So it's easy to just develop and then just drop your design onto your board and just see what it looks like. And we're continuing to add more device support as we go with each new release. So the operation of GUI Guide is pretty simple. You have your widget window on the left-hand side. We'll just fire up the old laser pointer. Easy to see what I'm talking about. So you have widgets. These are all standard LVGL widgets. And then you have the resources. So this is the different screens that you would have. And over on the right-hand side, there's attributes. So you click on a particular widget, and then you set its attributes, its color, its behavior, its animation, and what happens when you actually perform an action on that widget. So pretty straightforward, easy to understand. And then there's an information window here which shows things like code generation progress, build progress, and so on. So pretty straightforward stuff. So GUI Guider itself is built on Electron, so it's intended so it can work with libraries other than LVGL. I'm not going to go through all these different details, but this is the way it's constructed. And so it's built to work across different platforms and to generate different codes for different targets, and integrates on top of the LVGL library. In terms of the RTOS support, so the earlier versions would only mention free RTOS support, but the code that's generated runs in a single thread. And this means it can be used with other RTOSes like Zephyr, which is another open source project we're very involved in, and RT Thread, of course. And as the note shows here, there's not like a push button output to RT Thread, but you can generate code and just drop it straight into an RT Thread project, as we'll show at the end of the presentation. And we also provide a simulator so that you can run on a host target without having to have a board. So if you want to play around with that first and then try dropping it onto board, that's easy to do. So as I mentioned, with GUI Guider is a WYSIWYG UI design tool, and you can easily add actions and animations as you click on one of the widgets or resources. As I mentioned, you can generate code for all the standard tool chains that we normally support in our SDK and leverage the hardware that we have. So just to reiterate, it will run on Windows, Linux, or Ubuntu Linux and Mac OS as well, and supports multiple languages, English and Chinese primarily right now. And we provide several examples. There's a smart home, smart kitchen, e-bike, medical device, video demos, and we're releasing source for those as we go along. So some of those are already available and the others we're working towards releasing the source code. So when it comes to actually doing the customization and what you do, so there's 34 widgets currently. That list is growing. We support LVGL version 7 and 8. And in our upcoming release in July, we'll be up at version 8.2. And then you can customize and configure the attributes of those widgets to build your design. So you don't need to really build anything from scratch because of the power of the widgets that are all already there, provided by LVGL. You can generate C or MicroPython source code. For this audience today, C is going to be what's most relevant, but MicroPython is also there as an option. And we have multiple fonts that have very permissive licenses, so it's easy to customize your design for your own needs. When it comes to figuring out what you're going to do when someone, say, presses a button, it's easy to insert code either in C or Python, and you just do that by just checking the customer code option and adding the code in to the box there, the black box. And it's easy to do animations. There's several, only linear is shown here, but there's bounce and ease in, ease out, and so on. So there's several ways to make buttons move onto the screen when you change screens, which is kind of the pleasing UI that we're getting more and more used to. As I mentioned earlier, there's support for many of the NXP platforms just built in, so you can easily just have all the memory setups and the right choices for acceleration if it's available on that particular MCU, and you can configure the display in case you're not using the standard one. There's 16 and 24-bit color support right now, and a wizard for creating new projects as well. When you come to actually want to generate the code, you can choose between C and MicroPython, as I mentioned, or your target on the target. In the case of the target, you just select the toolchain directly. In the case of using RT Thread and the Studio for RT Thread, MCU Expressor is going to be your best option for the code generation, but really the code is universal, and you're just talking about different project settings that are being set up there so you can run directly into the IDEs. But MCU Expressor is using GCC as you would with RT Thread. And there's a code viewer as well. So there's a UI definition that as you build the design, the tool is generating that in JSON format, and you can view the JSON format, and you can also view the C code generated or MicroPython code if that's what you're using. So once you've got your UI built, like this is one from our smart home demo application, you can just run it in the simulator as we show here, and then it's pretty much it is a press button selection and press button operation to just run that on the board. This image is a bit fuzzy. I don't know what happened when they captured the screen grab from this one. It's a bit blurry, so it should look exactly like it does in the image on the left. And so it's easy to see what does it really look like, what does it feel like when you start using it with the touchscreen. That's all automatic within the version that will run on the board. When you come to actually export the code, this is showing the flow with MCU Expressor IDE, where you export code and it exports into a file format, and then you can pull it into MCU Expressor IDE to build your other application around it. And I'm going to talk about RT Thread in a moment and what you do in that case. So just summarizing everything around LVGL and GUI guider. So LVGL is a very good graphics library, very optimal, especially for low resource applications, and all the enablement around that with LVGL and the IDE and so on is all free for NXP customers to use. If you want to play around with it on a host computer, you can do that. We just the GUI guider is only for NXP silicon platforms when you go to embedded applications. We provide a great embedded graphics application development experience, very easy to use is what all our customers are telling us, and we're working hard to make it even better. And it really is very easy to put together a UI in a matter of, I would say, minutes, more than hours even, and certainly not weeks. And we're focused on optimizing this for our microcontrollers, so we're continuing to work hard on contributing to LVGL and looking at how we can make GUI guider enable you to optimize your design choices too. And you can keep up to date with what's going on with the LVGL community. We also have a GUI Guide community on community.nxp.com. So you can really get involved, give feedback, and we'd love to hear from you. So in terms of roadmap, we have version 1.4 coming in July, and then beyond that, we have the next minor release after that. So the kind of things we're doing in 1.4, lots of updates to the way you're interacting with widgets, adding more color depth, several new widgets that we've contributed to LVGL, and support for the 8.1 graphics library, and more target support being added as well. So there's more resources. Here's some links. We have some pages on the NXP site telling you about LVGL and the GUI Guide and where to get. That's where you can pick up the tool itself, and the design examples for LVGL are included in our MCU Expresso SDK. And you can pick those tools up from starting from the landing page for MCU Expresso. So let's move on to RT Thread itself and look at the specifics around that. So we've been working with the RT Thread team primarily out of our team in China, but that knowledge is spreading now for some time, and we're ramping up the focus on RT Thread support as we see the popularity increasing rapidly. And so there's already a number of BSPs available. Our focus is around the ones that are kind of darker type here. There is support for some older LPC devices, but those aren't based on our SDK. The 824 has an SDK, but that isn't what's in this particular BSP. So all of the 54,000 series, 5500 series, and i.MX RT devices is where our focus is. And there's various different platforms from NXP and from some of our ecosystem partners. And you can see that we've been pretty active there working with RT Thread to get these BSPs out there and accessible and easy to use for you guys. When it comes to using GUI Guide with RT Thread, you can configure the BSP. Just follow these simple steps in the configuration, and what that will enable you to do just by selecting LVGL for LCD and oops, there we go, and support for NXP GUI Guide. What this will do is make sure the code that's coming from GUI Guide can just be dropped straight into your project in Studio, and it's as simple as that. The code is pretty generic and portable, so it's very easy to use. And as we go forward, we're going to be supporting more devices, help working with the RT Thread team on the BSPs, and also looking at ways that we can make the transition into RT Thread Studio even easier. So I would encourage you to give this a go. If you have one of our boards, try it out. Even if you don't have a board, you can try the simulator and play around with it. You don't need any hardware. So we have some very exciting projects going on in relation to working with LVGL and with RT Thread, and really excited to see the outcome of those. So that concludes my presentation, Max. I don't know if you have any questions or anything else anyone would like to ask.
Well, I've just posted the comment. Thanks so much, Brendon. I just posted a comment saying now's a good time to ask questions. So we'll wait to see if anyone comes in with any. I'm just blown away with all the technologies today, like you say, the GUI builders and everything. You know, I come from a days where you were lucky if you could afford a toggle switch and an LED.
Yeah, I mean, I've been around a while myself too, and we have other guys in my team who specialize on graphics, so they have more history than I do of it. So, but I love to play around with these tools and just build GUIs, and you can just run them in minutes. And the way that, say, RT Thread Studio is being done to set up and make including these things much easier is you can do so much so quickly now. It's quite amazing. Yeah. My first programming experience was on a mini computer in and these Sharp desktop machines where you had to boot them up with a cassette tape and to get some basic running, and that was.
So, you had a cassette tape?
Yeah, I learned to program computer on a Commodore VIC-20, and that was my storage media. 3.5 KB of RAM and a cassette drive.
Well, I think the second job in my career, we had a PDP 1123. And you had to enter the boot sequence using toggle switches. You set a pattern and pressed enter, and another pattern and pressed enter. And that was enough to just get you to boot from the hard disk. And the hard disk was the size of a refrigerator. And it was multiple platters. So it was like a wedding cake. To remove it, you had a big glass dome that you put over it and screwed and pulled it out.
I remember seeing those.
And it was 1 megabyte, and that was for everyone in the company to share.
Yeah.
And right. We only had one folder, and it was the old 8.3 character naming convention. So any file that began with an M was mine, Max's. And Bill Gates famously said 64K of memory should be enough for anybody.
Yep.
Unbelievable. So
I think we had a few questions come in, right?
Marja said, I used to envy kids with games on tapes. Yeah. It's funny,
Isaac saying, finally another person who started their career on a Commodore VIC-20. Thank you, Isaac. My brother. So I think there was a question here from Nishin asking about memory handling. So it's an interesting one but especially depending on the devices you have, talking about what we have, right? So you have devices like RT 500, which has a lot of onboard memory. It has, from memory, I think it's 5 megabytes of onboard SRAM. So to get best performance, you're going to want to put as much as that as you can into that onboard SRAM, but you can store assets in flash as well. And this is one of these optimization things I mentioned. So you can make decisions to put those assets in external flash. If you're doing something like pulling up a background image and then putting animated things on top of it, you want to potentially use off-chip memory for that, because the loading operation could be pretty quick. But it's a real, it's a bit of an art to get that absolutely optimal if you're looking for absolute best performance. And this is the kind of area where we're looking at how we can do more with GUI Guider to help people on our platforms. So that's probably the best way to try and address that. It's not a simple answer, but yes, we do try and enable those things. And then the next one is previously LPC 1768 and 1788 were good NXP boards, I think, to teach in universities, and which one is now good. So I think that's a really good question, because you've got, depending on what you need. So if you want to like a very entry level device, the LPC 800 series based on an M0 Plus core is very good for that. There's a low cost board called an LPC 845 Breakout, which is about $6 or $7. And those they have an onboard debug probe, so they're very good for introductory level classes. If you want something in the class of a LPC 1700 series, you've got really two directions to go. You can go for the i.MX RT devices that don't have any on-chip flash but run very fast and have a lot of resources. So devices like the RT 1010 is the entry level for that, and then you can move up to the 1020, which has Ethernet and so on, depending on what you need. And on the flash-based devices, the Kinetis K64 is still a good platform, a little bit old, or the LPC 5500 if you want to explore security. A lot of the things that Robert mentioned in his presentations around security, those LPC 5500 series devices have those. If you want to add graphics for that too, you can do that too through the SPI interface to support the graphics. And then, yeah.
Roshan has got one. What will be the impact on the speed of the MCU?
Again, very good question. It's very application specific. So depends exactly what you're trying to do as to what it will be. The LVGL library was written to be used on right from the lowest resource devices and upwards. So it is one of those it depends questions. So it depends on what you mean is the impact, and that's where the graphics accelerators come in on certain things, where they're much better at doing things like handling certain types of data moves and blending. That's where, you know, if you're blending thing, that's a lot of pixel operations, and hardware accelerators typically do that stuff much better. Beside MX RT series, does NXP have any new MCU product lines? Well, the LPC 5500 series is relatively new and being added to. We are going to be having a big announcement about where we're going next at Embedded World, but I can't say any more. The answer is yes, absolutely. But I can't talk about it in this call, I'm afraid.
So the answer to the previous one was maybe, and the answer to this one is yes.
Yes, definitely. Well, I think the question is, will it impact the CPU? That's very hard to answer. It's
Well,
very
true.
dependent. But I mean, the kind of thing, I mean, you can particularly potentially pick one of the boards and then just have a play around and see what you get. You can display the frame rate that you achieve with the design. You can also use free tools in the MC Expresso IDE in order to look at the profiling and see what the loading looks like on that as well.
I think one big comment I would put in is I love GUIs, you know, and I love these tools that you can use to build them. The only thing I would say is when you're building a GUI, think about it first. Yes, you can build anything, you can do anything, you can make the most wonderful GUI. Does it make sense to the end user? You know, because the fact that you understand it implicitly and you know that you have to stand on one leg and spin around 3 times and press that button 3 times before this one becomes active is not intuitive to everybody.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think there's a real art and skill to developing in a good UI. And this is why with demo applications we've built, we tried to build them ourselves, and they look like people that, you know, engineers trying to build UIs. I mean, I'm sure there's engineers who are good at it, but especially we want to have one that looks nice, is really clean and modern looking and intuitive, is a skill. And this is why we work with Gabor and the LVGL guys. We outsource design work to them because they're very good at that. And there's other companies that do that too. You know, a lot of our partners like Crank and so on, they specialize in that kind of thing, and it's not trivial. And what we're doing with GUI Guider is giving you all the tools and the pieces to build it, but you still need to bring in that knowledge and that good thought process of exactly how somebody will use it to really get the best out of it. And one of the things, you know, along with that, with the HMIs, is integrating voice with the HMI, and that, you know, that's where we have our VIT library that can augment that too. And that's a really exciting new area to see how people can really use that in a device that's not cloud connected. So you're worried about security, or you don't want to be tied to a particular cloud service, you know, doing that too. So it's a very interesting area.
Yeah, I think someone just pointed out I did write an article on this sort of thing. I've written an article on just about every sort of thing. But I had a clock. It only had about 5 buttons, I think. But I lost the manual to it, and it was absolutely non-intuitive. And also it drifted in time. But I didn't know how to reset the time. You could press any buttons you wanted, nothing happened.
Yeah.
So when I woke up in the middle of the night and looked at it, I had to remember that it was like 2 minutes ahead, 3 minutes ahead, 4 minutes ahead. Eventually it was like an hour ahead. And so eventually I just threw the clock away and bought a new one. One final question before we move on. Any support for monochrome e-paper screens?
So we don't have e-paper screens directly interfaced to our EVKs, but on one of the slides I mentioned that in the upcoming release we are going to have support for 1-bit display, so monochrome basically. So yes, that is coming. So in terms of getting a design done with GUI Guider, yes, you'll be able to do that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Robert. Sorry, Brendon. Brendon. Robert's on my mind at the
minute.
Right,
thank you, Max. Thanks everyone for your time and attention.
Thanks, Brendon. Sorry about that.
Take care. Bye-bye.
You too.